the New Zealand Tech Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.
Hey folks, greetings and welcome along to the New Zealand Tech Podcast. I'm your host, Paul Spain. Great to have with us Dan Richardson today from CyberCX. Great to see you.
Great to be here, Paul. Long-time listener, first-time caller, as they say.
always good to have listeners joining us on the show. Look, Dan, cybersecurity is something that I think a lot of us are very interested in, and a real privilege to have you join the show and share some of your insights. Maybe quick overview of where you fit into this big wide world of cyber in New Zealand.
Yeah, so currently I'm the executive director, strategy and risk at CyberCX New Zealand. So CyberCX is a pure cybersecurity company. We do cloud as well, but in a very secure way. So we do the full end-to-end spectrum of cybersecurity services, right through from strategy, consulting, through to penetration testing, digital forensics, incident response, managed services, those types of things. So we've got our clients covered. Basically.
Great, that's really good. And you previously sort of worked, in a range of places, kind of across the industry. You were Chief Information Security Officer at Westpac. Previously, a little bit of work for the spooks. GCSB.
Very proud of my time at the National Cybersecurity Centre. But I think I was telling you before we started that I caught up with a friend last week and we were having a chat, and he said, I remember 1999 when we were working in London together. And you used to sit there and send my Windows PC the ping of death, and at the most inopportune times. And I turn around and you sit there and you were laughing. So I've been doing cybersecurity for a while now, and I've been around. So lots of corporates, obviously in New Zealand and overseas. Bit of time in government, about 5 years at the National Cybersecurity Centre, which was great team there. And then about 3.5 years at Westpac as the Chief Information Security Officer before joining CyberCX.
Oh, very cool. And interesting, I had a little bit of time. It's actually quite a small window of time in London in 1999 and did some stuff with the bank there.
Great time to be
Y2K days. So before we start, of course, a big thank you to our show partners, 1NZ, 2 Degrees, Spark HP, and Gorilla Technology. Lots I'm definitely keen to delve into on the cybersecurity front, but it'd be good just to tap in on some of the recent news. New Zealand Defence Force, they're testing some hardware that's gone up into orbit. I think it's really interesting and I guess, depending on the perspectives, that you come from on, I guess, the defense element of space. But in general, I guess, to me, it's pleasing to see New Zealand, as a country from a commercial perspective and from, other perspectives that we're getting involved in the world of space sort of more and more. Lots of companies here that are involved in aerospace and in space.
I was talking to a colleague in Australia a couple of weeks ago, actually. And, the comparison between the Australian space industry and the New Zealand space industry, that's something we're beating the Aussies. So let's keep doing that.
Well, it's interesting to see on that front, because it does seem as though in Australia, the government have put their foot to the floor more. So whilst New Zealand have, had quite a lead with, I guess on a number of fronts, but Rocket Lab probably being the biggest, most well known part of our sector. I think in a way that's kind of put a rocket under some of the Australians, and they're
agree.
like, we don't like Kiwis beating us, and actually, if there's money New Zealand can make, we should be able to make at least as much, and so I think there's probably a level of friendly rivalry in that area, and I'm sure it will continue. I think what we're seeing with a space minister and some of the direction that we're seeing from the current government. This is taking on a more important role at a government level. So I think that is just something that hopefully keeps heading in a good direction, because I think our ability as a nation to be able to generate more export revenue and do more work, as it relates to space and the broader aerospace segment, is generally a pretty good thing for our country and for the economy.
It's really cool to see as well, especially with Rocket Lab, but other companies as well, the interest in STEM that brings for like a younger generation.
Yeah, super
cool.
Yeah, I think when you see these possibilities that actually, hey, you can go from studying in a New Zealand school and end up in a space company. It's right. not such a far-fetched thing as I remember when I was growing up, and there was one of my brother's friends, and he was telling me his friend's dad was has been working for NASA, and I mean that was not a common story to hear around New Zealand, to have some sort of connection back to NASA.
Yeah, it seems so distant back in the 80s, 70s and 80s. It seemed very, very distant, but now we have our own space industry, and it's so good.
Yeah, really pleasing. So without sort of delving into the politics of Defence Force and so on, but I think it's pretty encouraging overall where we're headed. Now, another thing that caught my attention, this was an article from Susan Edmonds and stuff saying Westpac introducing fraud busting technology, but only in Australia. So we might just leave the headline there and come back to it once we start delving a bit more into cybersecurity, because it sort of sits in that broader area. But it's a scam busting technology called Safer Pay, which would add additional screening on basically on every payment that's flowing through Westpac, utilizing artificial intelligence. And so there's probably a discussion to be had there. And I know, not just from your Westpac experience, but your other sort of connections across the banking world, you could probably share some thoughts on that.
Let's park that for a moment
on that front. But it might just be that there's a bit of a trend, with what New Zealand gets versus what Australia gets in some cases. So looking at some of the things happening on a global front, Neuralink, that's been kind of crazy to kind of see what I guess when we first heard about it, and I don't know about you, Dan, but this idea of sort of brain implants, and we've known a few companies doing it, but Musk tends to be able to get the get the attention and get the headlines, and as you say, and get stuff done. But I'm not sure that I've sort of had really too much anticipation that we were going to see anything anytime soon. But here we are, where their first human patient has already been sort of touting the technology. 29-year-old Noland Arbor. I'm not quite sure if I've got his name pronounced right, but he's got the implant, and away he goes, and he's able to play chess online and the like, as a quadriplegic by controlling a game.
I'm not sure I want to be the test subject for it, put it that way. But look, if he's obviously with his medical condition getting something out of it, then there's a net positive there already. So I think it's probably a long way from general adoption, obviously, good 20, 30 years plus realistically by the time it gets to market and gets through all those regulatory hurdles. But definitely something to keep an eye on. And for those with a chronic medical condition or issues like that, then absolutely, why wouldn't we use technology to kind of help those people?
Yeah, and it seems to me it's for those for those edge cases, and of course we can throw around ideas of how this stuff could be used if it was available sort of mainstream. And I think most of us have seen The Matrix, and there's enough out there to
seen The Matrix too many times
to freak us out if we if we want to go down the rabbit hole. But I think just in many ways it just sort of blows my mind that this thing has happened quite quickly. Obviously, what it can do and how accurate it is and how useful it is. These are things that we will see evolve over. As you say, it could be quite a long period of time. There would be an argument, and I don't know how advanced the technology is, that it's not a million miles off some of these sort of headset-y type things that you can wear. Definitely, the next level from, I've tried out some of that sort of technology, and it kind of, pretty rudimentary, pretty simple.
Yep.
That it's a step along from that, but it's not the sort of thing where it's reading your thoughts and able to, squirt them out with an AI voice, right?
It opens up some interesting cybersecurity questions as well. You look at any piece of software or hardware out there, there's many vulnerabilities. Are there vulnerabilities in these things? How do you patch them? How do you deal with them? That's a real consideration.
Just a Band-Aid on the brain, mate.
Oh yeah.
I guess it will be one of those points that I imagine someone is already looking at how they can exploit the technology. Now, AI, we're seeing this kind of move towards buying training data, and there's been a bunch of sort of coverage on this front. It seems as though there's almost a kind of a shaming going on for those who are utilizing information that's sort of publicly available. And there was been coverage in recent days around OpenAI training on YouTube. There's I think a range of sort of licensing agreements and so on getting fired up, so that AI companies, AI providers can be using content sort of legitimately. It's kind of a challenging one, because I can see how an organization that's got a great AI just wants to kind of suck up the data that they can find that's publicly accessible, and just say, look, it's
train it on all the
this is
things.
just like a search engine, or just like a it's just replacing a human, but it can remember a whole lot of stuff. Any perspectives on where
really
you think we should be going here? Is fast sort of legislation useful?
I'm not an AI expert. I'm just a humble security guy. So I've had thoughts and feelings like everybody else does. But if you point a large language learning model at an existing set of data, of course you're going to get similar outcomes, right? Like AI, as we know, is not great at anticipating black swan type events. Expect the unexpected. So things that the human mind can conceptualize, AI really struggles to, because for exactly that reason, as you said, like you pointed at a particular set of data, you're going to get a very similar outcome. It will think that that's all it knows. So I can fully understand why everybody, people who are training these models might want to push that out to a much broader set of data. But even then, I think you're still going to run into issues, right? Like if you're pointing it at, I don't know, YouTube or X/Twitter, you're going to hoover up a lot of bot content. And is that really the stuff that you want regurgitated back out from your AI? I don't think so. So all of these considerations, we have to take into account.
Yeah, and the challenge of how good and robust the sources are, the differing sort of viewpoints on varying information that's available online, we're all probably unique in terms of what it is we read and consume and we're interested in and so on. And the perspectives through how we look at things, right?
Yeah.
You'll read a headline, I'll read a headline. We will, we might take quite different viewpoints on what that means. You read the article and it's like, well, oh, that makes sense, and I might look at it and go, well, that doesn't make much sense to me, and so on. So when you mash all of that sort of stuff together, the outcomes can be sometimes just super useful and helpful for everyone. Sometimes it doesn't play out well. We saw that with some of sort of Google Alphabet's AI things recently, where they've tried to sort of nudge it in differing directions, and it's kind of ended up going off the reservation. And I think you kind of see that with pretty much every platform to one degree or another is going to upset people in differing ways.
I mean, I watch a lot of YouTube, like most people do, and I'm really into architecture. So the YouTube algorithm is really good at giving me interesting architecture videos.
Yeah.
Now, it doesn't account for the fact that sometimes after a glass of wine on a Wednesday night, I might watch Love Island on TVNZ.
Yeah.
So we're discrete individuals.
Yeah.
And we might use one platform for one thing, which is giving you a set of data that points to a particular thing, but actually we've missed a whole bunch, So yeah, we really need to take that into consideration.
And then there's the what should or shouldn't we be paying for? And so should we be utilizing or should AI platforms only be utilizing sources that they pay for? Do you say, well, this is public, an individual could go and read these these news sources and could watch any video and so on, and you see there's all sorts of potential for drama in that front, and we've already heard around potential court cases and so
from a legal perspective, regulatory perspective, just access to those data sets. It's a minefield.
Yeah. All right. Well, that was kind of the I guess the big newsy topics for the week, and there's probably a bunch more we had down there we could delve into, but I'm keen to chat more around cybersecurity. This is very much your your world, and because I think cybersecurity is so important to each of us individually. We don't want bad things happening to our organizations, and therefore it has a flow on to to New Zealand as a whole. We get things wrong from a cyber perspective. It's kind of like having a hole in the boat, right? You can sink, and we certainly don't want our economy and and our people to be sinking because we've been taken advantage of from a cybersecurity perspective. So that kind of, I guess, puts us almost in a view of New Zealand versus the world. We're this little country, sort of, the towards the bottom of the planet. However, we're online like everyone else is.
As connected as everybody else.
We can be under attack. Yet there's only ever going to be a sort of certain capacity when it comes to what the government of a sort of smaller country can invest from a cyber security perspective. And because we have a lot of sort of smaller and medium organizations, those organizations are only ever maybe going to have access to probably a lighter levels of investment compared to the bigger players. And we certainly see a range of geopolitical issues going on in the world, where we've got wars, we've got economic dramas, and then we've got our our neighbours in Australia who are just that much bigger than us, and so there's that I guess debate of how we're doing versus our Aussie cousins or whatever you want to call them,
our good friends,
mates across the
friends
ditch.
across the ditch.
Yeah. So I think there's a few things we could sort of delve into there. Maybe this Australia versus New Zealand side, because on the New Zealand Tech podcast when we launched, one of the things that was happening was that the government had decided to invest, I think at the time it was 1.5 billion into fibre infrastructure for New Zealand. Now that's increased, and we've ended up with, where are we at? Something like 87% of the population with access to superb broadband and varying other options for the other 13%. And in Australia, I would politely say they've been trying to catch up ever since.
It's been a bit slower,
But on the cyber front, you could argue that shoes maybe on the other foot a little bit. What are your thoughts on how we're doing in this area, particularly from the realms that you've worked in, banking and government and so on?
That's a really interesting question, and the way I always kind of look at it is, Australia, much bigger country, much bigger economy, absolutely, and I don't want to sort of get fixated on what they're doing as our close friends and neighbours, but CyberCX is a trans-Tasman organisation. We work with organisations in New Zealand, we work with Australian organisations as well. And we sort of see, obviously, there's quite a different regulatory environment in Australia, and that drives a lot of cybersecurity investment. So you think about things like in Security of Critical Infrastructure Act that they have in Australia, mandates, minimum standards. They can designate systems as systems of national significance, which, have extra protections wrapped around them. We don't have that equivalent kind of regulatory or policy setting within New Zealand. And that means that, you can operate a reasonably important bit of critical infrastructure for the country, but there's no minimum cybersecurity standards that you have to meet for your technology. And that obviously puts us at a slight disadvantage compared to Australia. I'm not sort of saying that, we're underinvesting necessarily, but actually you kind of look at things, even in recent budgets in Australia, they put a whole heap of money into their national, cybersecurity defenses. Red Spice was the name of the program, but they've also partnered up with Microsoft for Cyber Shield. The New Zealand government is still kind of lagging behind a little bit with some of that, and obviously we've had a change of government that may change things, but it's quite a different environment here compared to Australia.
Yeah, I mean they've had a minister of cybersecurity, haven't they?
They have.
And a range of other things. I guess you could say the legislation there as it relates to cybersecurity and data privacy, tends to be more mature, there's some teeth there in some of the legislation, which is at a different sort of level to ours, certainly on the data privacy side.
I compare the responses to last year in Australia. They had some issues. Optus, Medibank, Latitude Financial Services. All suffered cyber incidents, and that was headline news in Australia for a good couple of weeks.
And they were being called out by the government.
They were being called out in Parliament,
really big time.
Very forward-leaning, and only one of those organisations operates in New Zealand. Latitude Financial, and the Privacy Commissioner in New Zealand is having a joint investigation with their Australian counterparts, which is great thing to do. But it dropped out of the news cycle in New Zealand very, very quickly. And we've seen that recently with MediaWorks as well. They had a data breach, and it was in the news on the Friday. By the Monday, it had completely gone. So, our sort of, not necessarily level of interest, but, the amount of airtime that it gets in the media is quite different here compared to Australia as well. So maybe that's drives slightly different behaviors.
Yeah, it's a really big point, actually. I think, and that the more airtime that we give these things, the more we're likely to think about them, attend to them, and so on. And I think that was something that has been really super visible in those cases, for those that are comparing, the media on both sides, it is night and day different when it comes to these sorts of issues, and I guess that comes from varying perspectives. Certainly, the emphasis that we see from a government level, and the government really calling out these organisations and holding them to account, there being enough of a solid enough sort of legislation that really puts quite a bit of weight on these entities. So when something happens, there's going to be a big fallout, not just from the media perspective, but then that tends to come along
in terms of fines and penalties as well. Quite different. In terms of, you look at some of the provisions that I think it was Medibank had to put into their financial statements as potentially money to compensate victims of their data breach. It was hundreds of millions of dollars, and we don't see that same level of response here at all.
I think when you look at say Latitude with what what happened there, I can't quite remember what the the impact was on them in terms of what they would do. But it wasn't a lot in terms of certainly here in New Zealand, in terms of what the cost was sort of per person impacted. But it seemed to be probably a lot higher on the Australian side for things, for a number of reasons. And the expectations when something happens as well in Australia. So, if an organisation leaks a whole lot of personal data, then they're really having to sort of, step up and, pay for a range of services. It might be pay for a new driver's license. So you've got, new ID documents with different, numbers and so on, so that, what has been taken in the breach then can't be used against an individual. On this side, I don't even know whether we've had really addressed a lot of these things. I remember, last time a while back looking at this with driver's licenses, and I think the the New Zealand thing was like, no, you're fine, you just keep your driver's license. It wasn't. It was like, no, we don't have a route for you to be able to change your driver's license.
No, there is no.
If you want
way
one in New Zealand, it's like, sorry, mate. Good luck. This stuff can just remain online for the next 10 years until when your driver's license expires or something.
I think I'm right in saying even if you lose your driver's license, you just get an exact replica of the one you
with
had
a reissue with
before.
the same numbers and so on. So there's maybe a little bit of work to do behind the scenes there if we're going to if we're going to be in a place where we're not taking advantage of, because there's a degree to these sort of settings ultimately impacting behavior, isn't there? And it's not like as Kiwis we're all sort of she'll be right, mate, on these topics, but there probably is a kind of a down under kind of
there's an element of
approach that would be impacted. Likewise in Australia, is impacted by if there are regulatory sort of pressures and legislation that says you're going to get hit this way or that way if you don't have things in place. That changes the picture a bit.
We're also quite a trusting group of people in this country, I would say. We trust not necessarily just our banks and our civic institutions, but individually we're quite trust each other. Maybe a lot more than in some other countries.
Very low from a fraud perspective.
So we don't expect that sort of stuff to happen to us. But as we all know, fraud, especially sort of cyber fraud and scams and those sorts of things, they work at an industrial level. So there are literally office buildings full of people who do nothing all day apart from perpetrate those sorts of crimes and those sorts of frauds, and we're not immune to that. And I think we fall into the trap of like, oh yeah, we're a small country, nobody's going to really care about us too much. But as you said up front, we're as connected as everybody else. So we suffer, from the same sorts of threats and the same sorts of issues. So we need to kind of think about that as well from a global perspective.
Now we've sort of talked about New Zealand versus Australia as it were, which is I guess it's good to have those chats sometimes, and even if it's just to to remind ourselves, maybe we're we're not as good as we would like to be. But if we step back and kind of look at the whole world, there are certain parts of the world that are probably more focused on outgoing attacks, whether it's nation state type things or for just general financial gain. North Korea often sort of comes up as a place that probably struggles to earn a lot from an export revenue perspective, and so for them this is something that can really move the needle, right? They can generate all sorts of
beat sanctions at the same time.
Bypass everything. So what can you sort of share from your experiences without giving away too many secrets from inside some of the environments where you may well have seen things that you're not supposed to talk too much about, but around that sort of overall those international sort of threats and what stands out.
That's a great question, and actually something I was reflecting on a few weeks ago, because like I said, I've been in cybersecurity a long time, and there must be something kind of keeping me interested. Otherwise I wouldn't do it. I would have gone and become a farmer or something. But I kind of look at it as a bit of a layer cake. So you think of the top layer of cyber threats as, those nation state actors, they're destructive, they might take down your ports or your critical infrastructure. And then there's another layer down, which is the sort of, again, state actors, but they're more focused on cyber espionage. And, you look at espionage now, especially signals intelligence, and it essentially is just computer hacking now. The days of the stuff that Edward Snowden talked about, mass collect on, internet access points, encryption is not ubiquitous, but it's ubiquitous enough that, that sort of data is way less useful than it used to be. And there are still some specialized applications around, RF and HF radio and those sorts of things, of being able to track ships, and that's great. Sure. But you think about espionage and you sort of think, well, how do you get data remotely? Of course you're going to hack into somebody's system and get it. And that's just, how the world does espionage now. And we're not immune to that. We're a country. People want to find out things about us, and we want to find out things about other countries as well, of course. And then you sort of go down in the layer cake of, highly organized criminal gangs, cyber criminals that, operate in certain jurisdictions in Asia and Eastern Europe and other places as well, not just those places. And they're purely driven by money. How do they monetize the cyber threats that they have access to, and how do they use some of those tools, techniques, procedures to get as much money as they can? And that's actually where large portions of the problem actually are. It's things like ransomware, that's prevalent and continues to be so. It's data extortion, as we've seen recently with some recent data breaches, things like fraud and scams on a massive industrial scale. And there is lots of money in it. And that's the motivation. And then you also, as you get sort of laid down more into sort of the hacktivists, people with an issue that they sort of want to push, that, those sorts of attacks, mostly DDoS, denial of service type attacks. They sort of do those sorts of things. And we saw a lot of that around the Israel-Hamas conflict, people picking sides and launching denial of service attacks against, infrastructure that was deemed to be supportive of one of those two sides. And that was much the same with Russia-Ukraine as well. So while there was no real sort of direct impact from a cybersecurity perspective for a country like New Zealand, a lot of the time there were flow-on effects from those denial of service attacks. So there's so much variety, not just in the type of actor, but the type of methodology that they use, and also their motivations as well. And that's kind of what keeps me interested. It's super interesting once you start sort of getting into it and understanding some of those things.
Yeah, it's not a boring one, that's for sure. There's always things going on. Do you, when you look at the role of AI, how do you pick where we might head over the next few years? Because from one perspective, it's like, wow, we've now got all of these sort of tools coming through from an AI perspective that can detect anomalies and so on, and usual activities that a person or group of people could never keep up with on their own. But then on the flip side, you've got the bad actors also have access to technology. And if they're able to really ramp things up with AI, which of course they are, that brings its own consequences. It sort of feels like we've got something of an arms race, happening.
We totally have, and like you've been in technology long enough, Paul, as we both have, that technology is agnostic. It can be used for good things, it can be used for bad things, and AI is really no different. But we're absolutely seeing cyber threat actors use AI tools to help them in their operations. So, common example, and this is happening to financial institutions around the region in Australia, New Zealand, and other places, AI-generated voicemails that go to bank customers, trained on a voice that they would find familiar. So, most people you can find on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, you can get voice samples from people really easily. Probably doing myself a disservice by being on this podcast because that's great voice samples of me.
It's too late now.
But you can use AI tools to generate the voice of somebody that is familiar to somebody else. Leave a voicemail on their phone. Oh, I'm in trouble. I need $1,000. Can you send it to my bank account? Here's my bank details. And that stuff actually happens. It seems like a bit like science fiction, but it's purely AI generated. But it's definitely going on out there. And then the flip side to that coin is, we've got some great security tools that help defend against some of those things. On an enterprise level, things like Microsoft Copilot for security, they've done some great job in making a security analyst's job not necessarily easier, but being able to get through more threats much more quickly. So we can use that the same variety of tool for good purposes as well. So it's very much a double-edged sword, like everything is.
Now, delving into the banks, because that's a world where you've worked, and you will I'm sure even as you in different firms, you'll have a fair bit of exposure to these things. It does seem, and I think this is sort of probably public knowledge, that the New Zealand banks don't get the same probably level of investment when it comes to cyber type things as our Australian banks, and you could probably quite easily link that back up to size, scale, and the different regulatory environment that we talked about earlier. There's been a fair bit of discussion recently around a move to verification when you're making a payment to a bank account, and I think we've got maybe one or two players that are sort of in the fintech sort of space, but aren't traditional banks that are able to sort of leap ahead and of the big banks. And offer some sort of verification type process. So when you take some money, and I mean, we can look back on, there's probably a whole range of scenarios, but I pick on the Team New Zealand one because it was reasonably public, right. and Team New Zealand's of reasonably broad interest, and they got the email saying, hey, can you pay this bill into a different bank account, and I think that the story goes that Peter Dolden said, no worries, I don't care which bank account it goes into, all good, and deposited the funds. Now, there's a range of ways of sort of stopping that sort of thing, and I think they were in a period where it maybe wasn't as broad knowledge as it is today around what your payment processes should look like, but there were lots and lots of organizations at that time that certainly knew to have some good processes in place. But there's also that element where if your bank account is verifying your money's going into the right accounts, that can cut down the risk. Not necessarily entirely, but it becomes another part of the picture. What are your thoughts on how hard is it to make these sort of changes, and how do you feel about the sort of the different levels of investment into our banking security here versus Australia?
Great question. look, when I was at Westpac, I'd spend time obviously talking to the board, and the board and all of the senior managers were really concerned with cyber issues and fraud and scams. And I think if you went to any financial institution in the country and talked to their board, talked to their chief executive, you'd hear exactly the same thing. If cyber risk isn't in your top 3 risks, operational risks at a financial institution, you're probably not doing your job very well. And I would say that for most, if not all, financial institutions in this country, it would be up there in terms of the risk that they're thinking about. I suppose where the difference comes in from a New Zealand perspective is, we are a lot more resource constrained than our friends in Australia. So, less people, less money. The big Aussie-owned banks obviously make huge profits. And there was a recent Commerce Commission report that sort of called them out, saying, you need to invest more in your technology stacks in New Zealand. And, I would completely agree with that, because, you look at some really critical applications that run in banks, and I'm not talking specifically about Westpac here, but more generally, they're running on bits of technology 20, 30 years old. Lots of banks still run mainframes as their main sort of core systems. And, actually probably nothing wrong with that realistically. Modern mainframes are very robust. But you sort of look at it and go, well, why are we behind in the banking industry compared to Australia, and certainly compared to Europe? I have an account with a European bank, and I log on to the app, and the level of security controls that I have to go through just to log on, not even transferring money.
Well, it's like that with my Swiss bank account too.
It's not a Swiss bank, but I wish, Paul. I wish. But it's a level above, what you get from your New Zealand banking application.
Yes.
Lots of New Zealand banking applications don't even use multi-factor authentication. And you go, well, surely you're going to run into some problems with that, not just fraud and scams, but actually more pressing problems, anti-money laundering problems and those sorts of things. So so there is a lag. There is a lag in the banking industry in New Zealand, and I don't think it's because people aren't focused on the problem, or boards or senior executives don't take it seriously. It's more that there's a lot of legacy within banking environments, lots of legacy technology, and sometimes retrofitting good, robust security controls over some of that legacy technology is really difficult. So that's probably the biggest issue. If you look at Westpac, I think that the story you were referencing might have made mention that in Australia, Westpac Australia is about to embark on a massive core banking refresh of all of their technology, all of their critical applications. And I was reading news articles about this, and I didn't see any mention of New Zealand in any of these articles. And you go, well, actually, that's a $1 billion bank for the New Zealand economy. So surely there has to be some commensurate level of investment on this side of the Tasman as well. So yeah, it's interesting.
Well, interesting is one very very polite way of putting it, I would tend to say, Dan. So yes, there's probably there is a lot more I would love to go into. We're probably just about sort of out of time. In terms of the variety of work and the things that you've been involved in at CyberCX, as an external party that's working with a range of clients sort of between Australia and New Zealand, how does that sort of variety compare to your work with national cybersecurity side of things with the NCSC and working in the banking world?
Yeah, look, I look at all of my experiences throughout my career as a learning journey, and where I'm at now with CyberCX, I'm only successful at doing that because of the experience that I have. And I've built that experience up over a number of years, and working at CyberCX gives me the opportunity to go into different organizations and help them with their cybersecurity challenges. And that is immensely rewarding in lots of ways. At a bank, great. I love my time at Westpac, love the team, but it's very, very samey, day after day. And what I love about my job at the moment is I can, be working with a bank one day, and then, a government the next day, and then actually a small medium enterprise, out in Pakuranga, and, helping them. And like, you get to see such diversity. And that's actually, what really makes us strong, within New Zealand, is that diversity. So yeah, I'm super pumped and super happy to be there.
Now, without ensuring that you end up walking out of here in handcuffs, what might people find interesting around, I guess, what goes in at a government level, National Cybersecurity Centre, and any things that you can share that might people might not sort of broadly know that
look,
people find interesting?
I would say if you're a person that's interested in cybersecurity and you don't quite know where to start, but you've got some really good skills, like it's a great place to go and learn.
Yes, yeah, I've heard that.
And it's a great place to do things that you can't do anywhere else legally in the country. But it's, I loved my time down there in Wellington with the team. Had some great people, learned a lot, had some great opportunities to go to different places and work with different agencies. And, I wouldn't trade it for anything. It's, I think people kind of, look at the public service and they look at the governments and go, oh, they're just Wellington bureaucrats. And that was not my experience. And that goes, for the wider cybersecurity sector within, the national security system. So not just the NCSC and the GCSB, but people like DPMC, National Cyber Policy Office, CERT New Zealand, DIA, everybody's there is really mission focused. And actually, coming to CyberCX, I've really found that at CyberCX as well. We have a lot of, ex law enforcement, ex-military, ex-intelligence people, and everyone's really focused on the mission. So that's super cool.
We've probably run out of time to sort of, delve into NCSC and sort of CERT coming together. But, your thoughts, is that a good move for New Zealand to see these two entities, be one? Yeah,
look, I'm on record as saying that I think it's a good idea. I think, having two agencies fulfilling very similar, functions within a small jurisdiction like New Zealand was always going to cause a few issues with overlap. I think for me, the thing that, we really want to see within the cybersecurity industry is, what's the plan? Like, what does it look like going forward? What sorts of services can we expect out of the NCSC, CERT, NZ, merged entity? What does that sort of look like? And I know, they're working on that right now. So I'd expect, over the next sort of 2, 3, 4 months, there might be some more information out there available. But, broadly, a very positive thing. Yeah.
Good. Yeah, I'd be on the same page on that one. So that's good to hear. Well, that's us for this episode. So thanks everyone for listening in and joining us on the New Zealand Tech Podcast. Of course, a big thank you to our show partners: 2 Degrees Spark, HP, 1NZ, and Gorilla Technology. If you have been watching the live stream, just make sure fire up whatever you listen to audio through, be it Spotify, Apple Podcasts, etc., a favorite podcast app. Look up for the NZ Tech Podcast there. That's a great place. You can subscribe for free, of course. And for those that are listening into the audio, which tends to be the bulk of our audience, of course, look out for us on your favorite video platform. We do tend to stream most weeks on a Tuesday afternoon. Some variations if I'm under the weather or other things happen, but most weeks that tends to be a Tuesday afternoon. And you can find us by following myself on LinkedIn, also NZ Tech Podcast across YouTube, X, and Facebook. So thanks everyone, and thank you, Dan. Great to have you on the show.
Great to be here. Thanks, Paul.
Anyone that wants to sort of connect or is looking for help, what's the best way to get in touch?
Oh, well, if you go to cybercx.co.nz, you'll find us. I'm on LinkedIn, Dan Richardson on LinkedIn. You'll find me. If you're a LinkedIn user, I don't do Twitter, unfortunately, but yeah, you'll find us.
Excellent. All right, that's great. Thanks very much, Dan.
Thank you.
Okay, cheers.
The New Zealand Tech Podcast, brought to you by Gorilla Technology, proactive and strategic IT.